Hello, I'm going to introduce you to a new feature that allows you to manage and chain your favorite Comfyui workflows directly in LipSync Studio, enabling you to create your videos from start to finish in one seamless process. This centralizes the creation of your projects and lets you do everything from a single interface. No more switching back and forth between different Comfyui workflows spread across 10 different tabs. Here's the process. First, I create a new project and load a video. I select only 10 seconds of the video and change the resolution to one that my graphics card can handle during Comfyui processing. This will depend on your configuration. Next, I select my audio input, in this case, input video, and click on Generate Driving Video. I make sure to configure the keyframes. Now, I can click on the Comfyui button. In this interface, I can chain the different available workflows. To start the chain, we'll extract the necessary ControlNet data for the next steps. I only select the useful ones and click Generate. Now, I will choose a workflow that allows me to transform my video. All workflows available on their own entries that you can edit. Here, I will choose one of my favorite workflows. I select the same controlled inputs previously created, adjust the prompt and other inputs, and click Generate. Let's take a look on the result.
Je vais juste me concentrer pour jouer et peu importe l'accueil qui me sera réservé.
Good. Now I want to lip sync. So I select lip sync in the next drop-down. The settings used here are those from the main interface. So I go back into the interface and select the quality I want. I go back to Comfyui and click on Generate.
Pas la prétention de demander ça. Je vais juste me concentrer pour jouer et...
Now, I want to upscale my video. So I chose my upscaler workflow from the drop-down menu. I chose my settings and click Generate.
J'aurais pas la prétention de demander ça. Je vais juste me concentrer pour jouer et peu importe l'accueil qui me sera réservé.
Voila! Now you can create all kinds of content directly in LipSync Studio. All the files used are in your project directory. You can make chains as complex as you want, and in any order you want.
Me concentrer pour jouer et peu importe l'accueil qui me sera réservé.
Now, you're probably wondering how to make this work with your own workflows, so I'm going to show you how to modify them so that LipSync Studio can interact with them. Before we begin, let's talk about the requirements. You need to have Comfyui installed and updated to the latest version, along with the Manager plugin. I'll let you find one of the millions of tutorials on YouTube for this, and I'll provide some useful links in the description of this video. Once Comfyui is installed, you need to configure the comfyui.json file located in the root directory of your LipSync Studio folder. You need to specify the server URL, the path to the input folder, the path of the output folder, and if you want or not, activate the option in LipSync Studio. To ensure that you have all the necessary requirements, I recommend loading each workflow from the Comfyui Workflows folder into the LipSync Studio directory one by one. For each workflow, check that you are not missing any specific nodes. To do this, drag and drop each workflow into the interface, click on Manager, then install missing custom nodes, and click on Install for each module listed. The rules to follow are: for inputs, they must be of type primitive or load image. They must have a name in the format input_something, and must be unique between workflows, except for input images. An input named input images is automatically populated. For outputs, they must be of type save image. They must have a name in the format output_something. To link inputs and outputs between workflows, they must have the same name. For example, output_depmap_images from the first workflow will automatically populate the input_depmap_images in the next workflow, so it will not appear in LipSync Studio. That's it. By following these few rules, you can create complex workflow chains. Now we are ready. For the demonstration, I'm going to choose this very simple workflow. It's the workflow that extracts ControlNet data. You can find its already modified version in the Comfyui Workflows directory. The inputs here allow you to enable or disable the extraction of certain data. In the center, we have the extraction process, and finally, the images are saved in specific folders. Let's begin the modification. LipSync Studio only exchanges images within the interface, so we need to choose a different method of importing than video import. For this, we will select the Load Images path node. An important thing to understand is that LipSync Studio reads the inputs of the workflow, but only interacts with certain types of nodes. Here, the Load Image node cannot be directly used as an input. However, we can specify the directory and use it as an input. Right-click on the node, select Convert Widget to Input and Convert Directory to Input. We will create a primitive string node to specify the input directory. Here's an important part. The name of the image input must be called input_images. This is a reserved name, and LipSync Studio will specifically look for the node with this name and automatically populate it with the correct information. In general, any inputs you want to appear in the LipSync Studio interface must have a title with input_something. The inputs can be load image path, primitives like string, float, integer, etc. Let's continue. I want to manage the activation or deactivation of the extraction, so I will modify the names of these primitives. Now, let's focus on the output. They must only be of the save image type and have a name like output_something. You also have to provide a file name prefix, which should always be something like folder name/image name. For example, for the depth map, we use depthmap/image as the file name prefix, and so on. Now let's save our file. We need to save it in API format. If you don't see this option, go to Settings and check the option Enable Dev Mode Options. Then click on Save API Format, and place the file in the Comfyui folder located at the root of LipSync Studio. Give it a relevant name. I also suggest saving the file in the normal format, because files saved in API format can no longer be modified in the interface. So be sure to save the original workflows. You can place them in the workflow folder located in the Comfyui folder of LipSync Studio. You need to restart LipSync Studio for the new workflow to be recognized. We can see all the inputs we've defined except for input images, which is automatically populated. Let's move on to a more complex workflow. We will see how to modify a workflow to achieve this result. Here is the original workflow. At the top left, we have the inputs, the prompts, the images to be used as inputs for IP adapter, etc. At the bottom, we have the outputs. On the right side is the main process, where we configure the model used, as well as some LoRa's, ControlNet, IP adapter. And at the very bottom, the generation of output. Let's start by modifying the inputs. As mentioned earlier, LipSync Studio accepts primitive nodes or load image nodes as input. Rename the inputs with descriptive names, as we will later find them in the LipSync Studio interface. Here, we need to remove the video input and replace it with an image loading input. Note the difference in the node name here. A single image is loaded with load image, while a series of images is loaded with load images path, images with an S. The load image node is an acceptable input for LipSync Studio, but load images is not. So, as before, we need to create a primitive string to be used as an input. We name it input_images. This field will be automatically populated by LipSync Studio. Now, let's focus on the outputs. Here, I'm only interested in the final output. So I create a new save image node and call it output_images. This is also a reserved name, which tells LipSync Studio that these are the images to be used as inputs in the next workflow in your chain. It is important not to forget to fill in the file name prefix field with a folder name followed by an image name. Always something like folder name/image name. Here, I choose animation/image. Now, let's look at ControlNet. Here, I have a series of switches that allow me to enable or disable the use of ControlNet. In LipSync Studio, I want to be able to manage this aspect. To do this, I create primitive booleans and give them descriptive names. I then assign these inputs to the ControlNet switches. Now, we can manage the switches directly from the input panel. Let's address another important aspect. Here, we have the image loading process used by the different ControlNets in our workflow. I want the input directories to be those generated by the previous image extraction workflow for ControlNet. I want this to be done automatically via LipSync Studio. So I will convert the directory input to an input node by right-clicking on the node and selecting Convert Widget to input and convert directory to input. I do this for all my different load images nodes. Now, I create primitive strings intended to receive the path of the images to be loaded. Note the name given to each node. If you remember, in the previous workflow, we named the output depth map as output underscore depth map underscore images. To match inputs and outputs, LipSync Studio checks if there is an output underscore name in the previous workflows of the chain that corresponds to an input underscore name. If so, it knows that it must automatically populate these fields. So here, we name our node input underscore depth map underscore images, and we do this for each input. Let's revisit our inputs to make a few more modifications. I have a parameter that allows me to manage the number of images extracted from different inputs. But I want this to be managed directly by LipSync Studio. So I'll remove input underscore. This is also the case for width and height. These should be managed directly by LipSync Studio. So I remove input width and input height and extract the size directly from the input images. Let's reorganize everything a bit. Let's also revisit the prompt. It's not a primitive, so we need to change that. Let's convert the text widget to an input and give it the name input underscore positive underscore prompt. That's it. We can now save in API format and standard format. Upon restarting LipSync Studio, the changes will take effect. Let's summarize what we've just covered. The rules to follow are: for inputs, they must be of type primitive or load image. They must have a name in the format input underscore something, and must be unique between workflows, except for input images. An input named input images is automatically populated. For outputs, they must be of type save image. They must have a name in the format output underscore something. To link inputs and outputs between workflows, they must have the same name. For example, output underscore depth map underscore images from the first workflow will automatically populate the input underscore depth map underscore images in the next workflow, so it will not appear in LipSync Studio UI. That's it. By following these few rules, you can create complex workflow chains. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my Patreon subscribers. Let me know what do you think about this feature. See ya!
J'aurais pas la prétention de demander ça. Je vais juste me concentrer pour jouer et peu importe l'accueil qui me sera réservé, j'aurais pas la prétention de demander ça. Je vais juste me concentrer pour jouer et peu importe l'accueil qui me sera réservé.
在生物技术领域专业成长的学生来说是绕不开的必修课。展望课程的发展脉络，从